The new neighbor. The moving truck's massive tires churned the gravel, a jarring counterpoint to the hushed landscape. Arthur Penwright, a man whose presence usually dissolved into urban backdrops, surveyed his new acquisition from the porch of the old farmhouse, a slim notebook already gripped in his hand. The air, crisp with damp earth and distant wood smoke, filled his lungs with an unfamiliar purity after a lifetime of exhaust fumes. Adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles, a familiar comfort against his nose, he absorbed the scene. The farmhouse itself, a relic of time, sported clapboard siding faded to a gentle gray, its wide porch embracing two sides. Beyond the skeletal branches of an ancient oak, meticulously tended fields stretched into the late autumn. Here, in this quiet Pennsylvanian corner, Arthur hoped to unearth the genesis of his next book, a book, he mused, that would finally capture the true essence of a life lived apart, a world he had only ever encountered in dusty academic texts. The truck's air brakes hissed, and two brawny men in matching blue uniforms began to unload his worldly possessions. Yet Arthur's gaze drifted past them, past boxes marked books, study, and kitchen, fragile, towards a simpler existence. From his vantage point, a distant farm beckoned. It wasn't the machinery or sprawling barns that captivated him, but the figures animated within its orbit. First, small flashes of color, a child in bright blue, another in deep green, darting between rows of late-season corn stalks. Their movements were unburdened, their faint laughter carried on the gentle breeze. Arthur found himself smiling, a soft, almost imperceptible upturn of his lips. He jotted a quick note. Children, unrestrained joy, close to nature. Later, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, the tableau shifted. Men in dark clothing, their faces shadowed by broad-brimmed hats, guided horses pulling plows through a freshly tilled field. The rhythmic turn of the earth, the animals' steady pace, the men's quiet strength. It was a scene plucked from another century. A profound dignity permeated their movements, a connection to the land that Arthur, a man whose life navigated glowing screens and printed words, found both alien and deeply compelling. He scribbled again. Men, harmony with land, deliberate pace. As dusk deepened, the women emerged. He watched them gather clothes from a line, their white bonnets stark against dark dresses. Their actions were efficient, their postures upright. Though expressions remained obscured by distance, a quiet purpose radiated from every gesture. He imagined their conversations, their shared tasks, the intricate tapestry of their communal existence. Women, communal efficiency, quiet strength. A familiar shyness crept over Arthur. He was an observer, a chronicler, a man more at ease with books than boisterous gatherings. Yet here, amidst a community so distinct from his own, he felt an almost overwhelming urge to bridge the divide. He had no interest in exoticizing them or reducing their complex lives to simplistic narratives. He yearned to understand, truly understand, the values shaping their days, the faith guiding their decisions, the quiet strength defining their existence. But how? His presence, even as a silent spectator, felt like an intrusion. He was the Englishman, the outsider, the man with modern conveniences and a curious gaze. He knew enough to understand that a direct, unannounced approach might be perceived as disrespectful, even aggressive. He chewed on the end of his pen, a habit honed during countless hours of research. He longed to inquire about their traditions, their beliefs, their daily routines. He wanted to learn about their farming methods, the intricacies of their social structure, the hymns they sang. He desired to sit and listen, to absorb, to simply be present without disrupting the delicate balance of their lives. But the chasm between his world and theirs felt vast, uncrossed. He imagined approaching one of the farmhouses, knocking on the door, and introducing himself. The words, however, caught in his throat even in his imagination. What would he say? "Hello, I'm your new neighbor, and I'd like to write a book about you." It sounded arrogant, presumptuous. He knew that trust, especially in a community like this, was not freely given. It had to be earned, slowly, respectfully. The last of the moving boxes were carried inside, and the truck rumbled away, leaving Arthur in the quiet embrace of the encroaching night. The farmhouse, now filled with his possessions yet still redolent of dust and time, felt both a sanctuary and a barrier. He was here, in their midst, yet profoundly separate. He watched as the lights in the distant farmhouse winked out, one by one, until only the faint glow of the moon illuminated the fields. A profound sense of anticipation, laced with trepidation, settled over him. His book, his great endeavor, depended on gaining access, on dismantling the invisible walls that separated him from his subjects. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew he would need patience, perseverance, and a willingness to venture beyond his comfort zone. He closed his notebook, its blank pages a silent testament to stories yet untold. The journey, he realized, had just begun, and the first step, he mused, would be to find a way to introduce himself, not as a writer seeking material, but as a neighbor seeking understanding. He just didn't know how. The silence of the night, broken only by the chirping of crickets, offered no immediate answers. He stood there for a long time, the cool air biting at his cheeks, a stranger in a new, captivating world. A kind glimpse. The sun, a benevolent eye in the vast blue, warmed Arthur's face as he sat on his porch, a half-empty mug of cooling coffee beside him. His gaze drifted, as it often did, towards the neighboring farm. Today, however, a new detail drew his attention. Near a riot of climbing roses, a young woman in a simple blue dress and white cap moved gracefully among rows of burgeoning vegetables. Sarah Stoltzfus. He recognized her from his brief, fleeting glimpses. She knelt, her hands deft and gentle, as she tended a patch of what looked like young kale. The morning light caught the subtle weave of her cap, making it seem almost luminous against her dark hair. There was a quiet intensity in her movements, a focused dedication that Arthur found profoundly moving. He watched, captivated, as she plucked a stray weed, her brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, as if sensing his gaze, she straightened, turning her head slightly. Their eyes met across the expanse of sun-drenched field and unmanicured lawn. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Arthur, caught off guard, felt a flush creep up his neck. He offered a tentative, almost shy wave. To his surprise, a faint smile touched Sarah's lips, and she returned his gesture with a small, graceful dip of her hand. The brief exchange, no more than a flicker, sent a surprising warmth through him. It wasn't an invitation to conversation, certainly not an open door, but it was a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of his presence. A small spark of hope, previously dormant, flickered to life within him. He longed to call out, to ask about the heirloom tomatoes he'd glimpsed, or the secret to her thriving herb garden. He yearned to understand the rhythm of her life, the wisdom embedded in her daily tasks. But he held back, a silent testament to his respect for their privacy, his deep-seated desire not to intrude. He simply smiled back, a genuine, unforced expression of his quiet gratitude. Sarah, watching the Englishman on his porch, felt a curious mix of emotions. His wave had been hesitant, almost apologetic, yet his smile held a genuine warmth that surprised her. She had noticed him before, a solitary figure often perched on his porch swing, sometimes with a book, sometimes simply staring out at the fields. He seemed a quiet man, his presence a muted counterpoint to the vibrant life of her family farm. As she returned to her weeding, her thoughts lingered on him. There was a loneliness about him, a quiet ache that resonated even across the distance. She saw the way his eyes lingered on her family's activity, the way he seemed to absorb the sights and sounds of their day. It wasn't an intrusive gaze, but one filled with a gentle curiosity, perhaps even a touch of longing. Her grandmother, Mammy, had always taught her to observe, to see beyond the surface, and Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for the man who lived alone in the big house. She imagined him eating his meals by himself, the silence of his home a stark contrast to the boisterous laughter and gentle hum of conversation that filled her own kitchen. She wondered what brought him to this quiet corner of Pennsylvania, so far from the bustling world she imagined he came from. She had heard the whispers, of course, about the writer, the Englishman with the books. Some of the younger women giggled about his serious expression, but Sarah saw something deeper. He wasn't like the tourists who occasionally drove through their roads, snapping photographs and gawking. There was a quiet respect in his bearing, an almost reverent observation. She saw it in the way he never ventured too close, the way he kept his distance, yet remained so deeply present. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows, Arthur watched Sarah gather her tools. She rose, brushing dirt from her skirt, and then, before disappearing around the side of her house, she glanced back. Another small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't much, but for Arthur it was enough. It was a thread, however fine, connecting his world to hers, a quiet promise of a deeper understanding yet to come. The thought, unspoken and unbidden, settled in his heart like a seed awaiting the right conditions to sprout. He knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that this was just the beginning. The aroma of freshly cut grass, carried on a gentle breeze, mingled with the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant chimney. He took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over him that he hadn't felt in years. This place, these people, held a profound mystery, and he felt, in that moment, a quiet determination to unravel it, one respectful step at a time. The world outside his fence, vibrant and alive, seemed to beckon, promising stories yet untold. The Lost Hat. The morning sun, already high, cast long, shimmering shadows across Sarah's meticulously kept garden. Her bonnet, a crisp white against the vibrant greens and emerging reds of her tomato plants, bobbed rhythmically as she worked. A stray gust of wind, uncharacteristically strong for late spring, rustled through the maple trees lining the edge of her property. It wasn't until she was kneeling by a row of burgeoning carrots, trowel in hand, that something caught her eye. Tucked beside a clump of wild daisies near the fence line, a dark, broad-brimmed hat lay half buried in the grass. It was Mr. Arthur's. A faint smile touched her lips. He must have lost it yesterday, perhaps during one of his pensive strolls along the perimeter of his own yard, which bordered hers. It was an old hat, slightly worn at the brim but clearly cherished. She carefully set her trowel down, brushed the soil from her hands, and rose, carrying the hat. Its dark felt surprisingly soft. She walked towards the fence, her steps light and purposeful, a subtle rustle of her dress accompanying her. Mr. Arthur was on his porch, a book open on his lap, though his gaze seemed fixed on the distant hills, lost in thought. He wore a tweed jacket despite the warmth, a habit she'd come to observe. As she approached, he lowered his book, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized her. A nervous energy seemed to ripple through him, evident in the way he adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Arthur?" she called softly, holding the hat out. He blinked, a slow, deliberate movement, then pushed himself out of his chair, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. "Sarah, goodness, you found it." He hurried down the porch steps, his movements a little clumsy, a testament to his surprise. "I didn't even realize it was gone. I must have... yesterday, when I was... Thank you." He reached for the hat, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. A peculiar warmth, like sun on stone, lingered where their skin had met. "The wind was strong," she offered, her voice a quiet melody. He nodded, turning the hat over in his hands as if examining a rare artifact. "Indeed, a rogue gust. I'm quite attached to this old thing. It's seen me through many a creative blockade." He offered a self-deprecating smile. "Thank you again, truly." His eyes, a shade of warm hazel, met hers, holding a genuine gratitude that went beyond the returned hat. He paused, then, as if gathering courage, gestured vaguely towards her vibrant garden. Your garden is quite extraordinary, Sarah. the colors, the sheer abundance of life. Sarah's gaze shifted to her garden, a small sense of pride blooming within her. It is a blessing, the good earth provides. It does, he agreed, stepping a little closer to the fence, his curiosity palpable. But it also requires dedication and skill. Those bright red ones, are those petunias? He pointed to a cluster of scarlet blooms spilling from a wooden planter near her back door. She shook her head gently. Impatiens. They like the shade. Ah, impatiens, he repeated, as if committing the word to memory. And the tall, purple ones, what are those called? He gestured towards a stand of delphiniums that reached towards the sky like floral spires. Delphiniums, she supplied. They are quite hardy. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Hardy, yes, I can see that. I've always admired people with green thumbs. Mine, I'm afraid, are rather ink-stained. He held up his hands, a faint smudge of black visible on his thumb and forefinger. A small, almost imperceptible chuckle escaped her lips. Perhaps you simply haven't found the right plant, she suggested, a hint of playfulness in her tone. His eyes lit up at her small jest. Perhaps, or perhaps I need a better teacher. He looked at her then, a direct, hopeful gaze that made her breath catch. The silence between them stretched, not awkward but expectant. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions and tentative invitations. The sun warmed her face, and the scent of freshly turned earth mingled with the sweet fragrance of her impatience. Sarah didn't reply directly, but a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of her head, a slight shift of her weight, conveyed an openness. A seed of something new had been planted, not in the rich soil of her garden, but in the fertile ground between their two worlds. Mr. Arthur felt it too, a gentle stirring of possibility, a whisper of connection that promised more than just pleasantries about flowers. This simple exchange, born of a lost hat, felt like the first brushstroke on a canvas he hadn't known he was painting. A secret agreement. The late afternoon sun, already softening towards the horizon, cast long, wavering shadows across Sarah's meticulously tended rows of corn and beans. She worked methodically, her bonnet-clad head bent over a stubborn patch of weeds, the rhythmic scrape of her hand trowel a familiar comfort. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of honeysuckle from the trellis near the porch. A slight disturbance in the peripheral of her vision drew her gaze. Mr. Arthur, hat now firmly and correctly on his head, stood at the edge of his property, just beyond the low stone wall that marked their boundary. He wasn't waving, nor was he calling out. He simply stood, a contemplative figure against the backdrop of his less manicured lawn, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. His posture was hesitant, almost apologetic, yet there was a clear intent in his stillness. Sarah straightened, her hand resting on the small of her back. She waited, a silent invitation, her heart thrumming a little faster than usual. She noticed the way he clasped his hands in front of him, then unclasped them, a slight nervous habit. He cleared his throat, the sound barely carrying across the gentle breeze. "Miss Stoltzfus," he began, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly deep for his somewhat slight frame. He took a cautious step closer to the wall. I apologize if I'm disturbing your work." Sarah offered a small, reassuring smile. "No, Mr. Arthur, the weeds will wait." She wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek with the back of her gloved hand. He shifted his weight, his eyes, a remarkable shade of clear blue, scanned her garden, lingering on the vibrant zinnias bordering the path. "Your garden, it truly is something else. So much life, so much order." He paused, then his gaze, though still respectful, found hers directly. "I was wondering, Miss Stoltzfus, if you might ever, when you have a spare moment, of course, tell me a little more about your way of life." The question hung in the air, unexpected and profound. Sarah's hands, still clad in gardening gloves, tightened imperceptibly. Her mind raced, a flurry of thoughts like startled birds. Tell him about their life? About the Ordnung? About their faith? Their community? To an English stranger, a man who lived just a short walk away, yet existed in a world so vastly different, it was an unheard-of request, one that immediately pricked at the edges of her conscience. Her family, her community, would never approve. Such openness with an outsider was simply not done. It was too close, too personal. Yet, as she looked at him, truly looked at him, she saw not just curiosity, but a genuine yearning for understanding, a quiet loneliness in his blue eyes that resonated with something deep inside her. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't intrusive. He was simply asking. His sincerity was palpable, a fragile thing that seemed almost afraid to be rejected. The sun dipped lower, painting the western sky in hues of orange and rose. A cool evening breeze stirred the leaves of the maple tree overhead. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, the scent of earth and honeysuckle suddenly sharp and poignant. She thought of her mother's warnings about the outside world, her father's quiet admonitions about keeping to their own. But she also thought of the lost hat, of the simple gratitude in Mr. Arthur's eyes, the way he admired her work, the respectful distance he maintained. Finally, she exhaled, a soft breath that seemed to carry the weight of her internal debate. She took a step towards the stone wall, lowering her voice, almost a whisper against the growing dusk. "Mr. Arthur," she began, her gaze darting to his house, then back to his earnest face. "What you ask, it is not something I can do openly." His expression fell slightly, a flicker of disappointment. "However," she continued, her voice even softer, leaning a fraction closer across the low wall, "if you are truly interested, and if you truly wish to understand, then perhaps I could. But," her eyes met his, firm and serious, "it must remain our secret. No one else must know, not your neighbors, not mine. Do you understand?" Mr. Arthur's face brightened, a genuine, almost childlike relief washing over him. He nodded vigorously, his eyes wide and earnest. "Absolutely, Miss Stoltzfus. A secret. Our secret, I promise you." His voice was low, laced with a solemn vow. "I wouldn't betray your trust for anything." The words, "our secret," hung between them, solidifying an unspoken pact. A new, fragile connection had been forged in the twilight, a bridge built on a shared understanding and a whispered promise, stretching across the invisible divide between their two worlds. Sarah felt a strange mix of apprehension and a nascent sense of purpose bloom within her. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential complications, but for now, there was only the quiet accord of a secret agreement. Lessons by the oak tree. The ancient oak, a sentinel standing guard at the farthest edge of the Stoltzfus property, became their silent confidant. Its gnarled roots, like an old man's knuckles, pushed through the earth, creating natural benches in the dappled shade. It was here, beneath its sprawling canopy, that their clandestine lessons began. Arthur arrived first, as always, a few minutes before the agreed-upon time. He sat on one of the larger roots, his notebook already open, a sharpened pencil poised. The air was thick with the scent of clover and damp earth, punctuated by the distant bleating of sheep. He watched the field, the line of trees blurring slightly in the heat haze, until a small, determined figure emerged from the direction of the farmhouse. Sarah moved with an economy of motion, her dark blue dress and white cap blending almost seamlessly with the late afternoon shadows. There was no hesitation in her step, only a quiet resolve. As she approached, Arthur felt a familiar flutter in his chest, a mix of apprehension and profound respect. "Good afternoon, Mr. Arthur," she said, her voice soft but clear, like the rustle of dry leaves. She settled on another root, a respectful distance away, her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze, though direct, held no challenge, only a gentle inquiry. "Good afternoon, Sarah," he replied, a warmth spreading through him. "Thank you for meeting me." She nodded, acknowledging his gratitude. "Where would you like to begin today?" Arthur consulted a mental list. I was hoping you could tell me more about the rhythm of your year, the planting, the harvesting, and how faith intertwines with it all. Sarah paused, considering. Our year begins with the spring plowing, a time of hope and hard work. The soil is turned, prepared for the seeds. It is a time for trusting in God's bounty, for we cannot make the seeds grow, only tend them. We plant corn, alfalfa, tobacco. Our hands work the earth, but our hearts pray for rain and sunshine. Arthur scribbled furiously, trying to capture not just the facts, but the underlying philosophy. He noted the types of crops, the tools she described, horse-drawn plows, hand cultivators. Do all families grow the same crops? Mostly. We share equipment, help each other during busy times. A neighbor's strong back is a blessing during harvest. It is not about one family thriving alone, but the community together. He looked up, a new question forming. And the women's roles in this? Beyond the garden, that is. He gestured vaguely towards the neat rows visible from their vantage point. A faint smile touched Sarah's lips. The garden is vital, of course, for canning, for daily meals, but inside there is quilt making, sewing clothes, preparing meals for many. We tend to the children, teach them the ways of our people. A home must be warm, well-fed, and filled with God's word. Arthur imagined the scene, the hum of a treadle sewing machine, the vibrant colors of a quilt taking shape beneath nimble fingers, the comforting aroma of baking bread. He jotted down quilt patterns, symbolic meaning, and children's education, practical skills, Bible stories. He felt a pang of longing, a wistful appreciation for a life so firmly rooted in tangible creation, so far removed from his own world of abstract thought and isolated endeavors. He asked about their Sunday services, the plainness of their meeting houses, the importance of sermons preached in Pennsylvania Dutch. Sarah explained the concept of Gelassenheit, self-surrender, humility, as the cornerstone of their faith, a principle that guided their daily lives, their dress, their refusal of modern conveniences. It is not about denying oneself pleasure for the sake of suffering, she clarified, seeing the contemplative frown on his face, but about denying the self that seeks worldly acclaim, that pulls one away from God and community. A simple life allows for a deeper connection. Arthur wrote it all down meticulously. He was a sponge, absorbing every detail, every nuance. He found himself increasingly captivated, not just by the information, but by Sarah herself. Her quiet dignity, her unshakable conviction, the way her eyes, though often downcast, would occasionally meet his with a flash of gentle wisdom. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple. A cool breeze stirred the oak leaves above them. A sense of urgency settled over Arthur. He knew their time was drawing to a close. This has been invaluable, Sarah, he said, closing his notebook. I can't thank you enough. She offered a small, shy smile. It is good to share what we know. Perhaps it will help you understand. It already is, he assured her, meaning it. More than you know. As she rose to leave, he noticed a faint smudge of dirt on her cheek, a testament to her day's labor. It was a small detail, but to Arthur, it spoke volumes of her authentic, unadorned life. He watched her walk back towards the farmhouse, a solitary figure against the fading light, carrying with her the secrets of her world, and now a small, shared secret of their own. The oak tree stood silently, its long shadows stretching across the field, guarding their fragile trust. Worlds apart, hearts connected. The late afternoon sun, softened by the filtered light through the oak's canopy, painted shifting patterns on the ground as Arthur began to speak. He described his world, a world so far removed from Sarah's that it felt like a fable. He spoke of cities, sprawling labyrinths of glass and steel, where structures scraped the sky, their summits often lost in the clouds. He recounted the rush of traffic, the constant hum of unseen machinery, the sheer number of people, a river of humanity flowing through streets lit by a million artificial suns. Sarah listened, her hands, still faintly dusted with garden soil, clasped in her lap. Her gaze, usually so placid, held a bright, almost childlike wonder. She asked about the tallest building he'd ever seen, her voice a soft murmur against the rustle of leaves. Arthur chuckled, a sound that surprised even himself, so rarely did he genuinely laugh aloud. He told her about standing at the base of a skyscraper in New York, neck craned back, feeling dwarfed and insignificant. He described the faint sway one could feel at the very top, the city unfolding below like an intricate miniature map. "So many people," she whispered, her brow furrowed in thought. "How do they all know each other?" Arthur paused, considering. "They don't, for the most part. It's a different kind of life. Many live in close proximity but remain strangers. There's an anonymity to it." Her expression shifted from wonder to a quiet sadness. "That would be hard." He nodded. "It can be, but there are also communities within cities, places where people do know each other, where they find their own kind of belonging." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "But it's not the same as here. Not the same deep roots, the shared history." A faint smile touched her lips, a fragile blossom. "No, I suppose not." Then, an unexpected spark ignited between them. Arthur, trying to explain the concept of a crowded subway, used an exaggerated hand gesture, mimicking the press of bodies. He described the bizarre, unwritten rules of city etiquette, like avoiding eye contact on public transport. Sarah, picturing it, let out a soft, melodic laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. It was unrestrained, genuine, and utterly captivating. Her laughter was infectious. Arthur found himself grinning broadly, a warmth spreading through his chest. He told her about a time he'd accidentally worn 2 different shoes to a conference, only realizing it hours into the day. Sarah's eyes crinkled at the corners, her amusement evident. He, in turn, found himself charmed by the simple joy she exuded, a purity he hadn't encountered in years. It was a shared moment of lightness, a discovery of common ground in the most unlikely of places. The strictures of their separate worlds seemed, for a few precious moments, to melt away. As the laughter subsided, a comfortable silence settled, rich with unspoken understanding. Arthur observed her, the way the sunlight caught the stray wisps of hair escaping her bonnet, the gentle curve of her neck. He admired her spirit, not just her quiet strength and unwavering faith, but the unexpected glint of curiosity and humor he had just witnessed. There was a profound grace about her, an inner calm that radiated outward. He felt a deep respect, bordering on reverence, for the life she led, for the values she embodied. Sarah, too, felt a pull. She watched Arthur, sensing the depth of his thoughts, the genuine interest in his eyes. He wasn't like the other Englishers who sometimes drove through their community, their gazes often a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. Arthur looked at her with an open kindness, a yearning to understand rather than to categorize. She saw the loneliness in him, the quiet academic searching for something real, something authentic, and it resonated with a part of her she hadn't known existed. His stories, though of a world she could barely conceive, were told with a gentle earnestness that drew her in. There was a good heart in this man, she thought, a heart that sought connection, even across the vast chasm of their different lives. Their meeting, which had begun as an exchange of knowledge, was subtly shifting. It was no longer just about information. It was becoming about something more personal, more profound. The oak, ancient and silent, bore witness to the fragile, burgeoning connection between worlds apart, between hearts that were, in their quiet ways, beginning to entwine. The path ahead was unknown, fraught with the unspoken dangers of their secret, but for now, in the dappled light, there was only the shared warmth of understanding. Deeper conversations. The crisp autumn air, once a mere backdrop to their initial tentative exchanges, now seemed to hum with a quiet energy, mirroring the shifts occurring between Arthur and Sarah. Their meetings, initially sporadic and brief, stretched into longer, more frequent occurrences. What began as lessons about soil types and quilt patterns gradually transformed into something far more intimate. The small hidden space behind the Stoltzfus barn, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, became their sanctuary. Arthur, no longer content with mere observation, began to probe deeper. He spoke of the intellectual dreams that had driven him from the anonymous urban sprawl, dreams of understanding the intricate tapestry of human experience, of finding meaning in lives lived differently. He confessed the quiet loneliness that had often accompanied his academic pursuits, a void that even the most profound books couldn't fill. Sarah listened, her hands often busy with a piece of embroidery she had brought, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "Do you ever dream of things beyond your world, Sarah?" he asked one afternoon, the question hanging delicate in the air between them. A field mouse scurried past his worn boots, unheeded. She paused, her needle suspended over a half-finished bloom. "We dream of good harvests, of strong children, of peace within our community," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, "of living in God's grace." "But personal dreams?" Arthur pressed gently. "A place you wish to see, a skill you long to master, a story you wish to tell." Sarah's eyes, usually so direct, flickered towards the distant tree line. "I have never thought of such things as dreams," she admitted. "We work the land, we raise our families. Our purpose is clear." Yet, as she spoke, a flicker of something new, a nascent curiosity, danced within her. Arthur's questions were like tiny seeds, planted in soil she hadn't known existed within her. He told her of grand libraries, of operas with soaring music, of the silent, awe-inspiring majesty of art museums. He described the rush of a bustling city street, the scent of 1,000 different cuisines, the kaleidoscope of faces. Sarah absorbed it all, her expressions shifting from wide-eyed wonder to a quiet solemnity. She found herself imagining these places, piecing together the vivid fragments Arthur offered, constructing a world entirely alien yet strangely compelling. In turn, Arthur learned of Sarah's simpler aspirations, not dreams perhaps in his sense, but deeply held desires: to cultivate a garden that brought joy and sustenance to her family, to create quilts of such beauty that they spoke of devotion, to raise children who honored their faith and their heritage. He saw a profound beauty in these quiet intentions, a stark contrast to the often frenetic ambitions he was accustomed to. One blustery afternoon, as a sudden gust of wind rattled the barn door, Arthur spoke of a moment of profound sadness he had experienced after his grandmother's passing. He described the emptiness that had settled in his heart, the feeling of being utterly alone in a world that continued to spin heedlessly. Sarah listened, her own eyes clouding with a shared understanding. When he finished, she reached out, a hesitant hand resting briefly on his arm. The touch was fleeting, barely there, but it sent a surprising warmth through Arthur. "Grief is a heavy burden, Mr. Arthur," she said, her voice laced with empathy. "But it also shows how deeply we have loved." Her words, so simple yet so profound, resonated within him. He found himself confiding in her with an ease he hadn't known he possessed, sharing vulnerabilities he'd kept hidden even from himself. And as he spoke, he watched her, truly watched her, seeing not just the diligent Amish woman, but a soul of remarkable depth and compassion. Sarah, too, felt a shift. When Arthur spoke of his loneliness, a peculiar ache settled in her chest, a desire to offer comfort that went beyond simple neighborliness. When he described a bustling city market, her imagination soared, creating images of vibrant chaos. And when he laughed, a genuine, uninhibited sound that rarely escaped him, a new, unfamiliar warmth blossomed in her heart. It was a sensation she couldn't name, a quiet burgeoning that settled deep within her, a sensation that made her pause in her chores, her thoughts drifting unbidden to the man who spoke of libraries and loneliness, and who listened to her with such unreserved attention. This warmth, gentle yet insistent, was unlike anything she had ever known, and it stirred a quiet apprehension within her. She knew, without needing words, that she was treading a path her faith and her community forbade, a path from which there might be no turning back. The touch of a hand. The late afternoon sun, already low, cast long, distorted shadows across the Stoltzfus property, painting the familiar landscape in hues of deep gold and amber. Arthur, on his way back from a rather unsuccessful fishing attempt at the creek, paused at the edge of Sarah's garden. She was there, as he'd half expected, tending to the last of the autumn cabbage. Her bonnet was tilted slightly, and her simple blue dress, faded from countless washings, seemed to absorb the fading light, making her appear almost ethereal against the rich, dark soil. He watched for a moment, unseen. The meticulous care with which she worked, the gentle turn of her wrist as she dislodged a stubborn weed, the way her fingers brushed the leaves as if in silent communion, it was all a testament to a life lived in harmony with the earth. He found himself mesmerized, a quiet sense of peace settling over him, an emotion he rarely encountered in his own often frenzied existence. Finally, he cleared his throat, a soft, almost apologetic sound. Sarah straightened instantly, her movements fluid and graceful, turning to face him. A faint blush rose in her cheeks as she met his gaze, a gesture that never failed to charm him. "Mr. Penright," she said, her voice a soft murmur, like the gentle rustling of leaves. "Sarah," he replied, a small smile playing on his lips. He held up his nearly empty creel. "The fish were not cooperating today. Perhaps they sense my lack of skill." She chuckled, a sound like wind chimes. "Sometimes they are stubborn, or perhaps they are simply too clever for the English." He laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that always surprised him with its suddenness. "That's entirely possible. I suppose I'll have to stick to writing about them rather than catching them." He gestured to her garden. "Everything looks so vital, a stark contrast to my own meager attempts at cultivation." Sarah walked towards the low stone wall that separated the garden from the path leading to the creek, wiping her hands on her apron. "It is a lot of work, but it provides. You could try again with the garden. The soil is good here." "Perhaps," he mused, watching her, "though I suspect I lack the touch." He took a step closer, noticing a loose stone in the path directly in front of her, one that looked precarious. "Careful there," he said, extending a hand almost instinctively as she prepared to step over it. His touch was light, tentative, brushing against her forearm, but she was already off balance. Her foot snagged on the errant stone, and she stumbled forward, letting out a small gasp. Without thinking, Arthur's hand shot out, grasping her arm firmly to steady her. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, arced through Sarah. It wasn't merely the surprise of his touch or the suddenness of her near fall. This was different, deeper. A powerful shiver, not of cold, but of something profoundly electric, coursed through her from the point of contact, spreading like wildfire through her veins. Her breath hitched. The world seemed to narrow, focusing entirely on the warmth of his fingers around her arm, the subtle pressure, the unexpected strength. In that instant, everything shifted. The quiet curiosity, the nascent affection, the unspoken comfort they had found in each other's presence, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. It wasn't just friendship she felt for Arthur Penright. It was something far more potent, something that thrummed with a dangerous energy, a yearning she had never before recognized. Her eyes, wide and startled, met his. His expression was one of concern, his brow furrowed slightly. "Are you all right, Sarah? I'm so sorry. I should have pointed out that stone sooner." She could only nod, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. The heat of his hand seemed to burn through the fabric of her sleeve, leaving an indelible mark on her skin, on her very soul. The innocent touch, intended only to prevent a fall, had instead brought about a revelation that both thrilled and terrified her. With a sudden, almost violent jerk, Sarah pulled her arm away, as if scalded. She took a swift step back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The warmth lingered on her arm, an phantom sensation that was both exquisite and agonizing. The realization, stark and unyielding, settled heavily in her stomach, a tight, cold knot. She was falling for him. She, Sarah Stoltzfus, an Amish woman bound by faith and tradition, was developing feelings for an Englishman. And the depth of those feelings, revealed in that singular, accidental touch, was far greater, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She swallowed hard, trying to regain her composure, but her hands trembled slightly. I am fine, Mr. Penright, thank you." Her voice was breathy, strained. She avoided his gaze, her eyes fixed on the ground, where the innocent stone now seemed to mock her. Arthur, sensing her sudden withdrawal, her abrupt change, looked perplexed. "Sarah, is something wrong?" His voice was gentle, filled with a quiet concern that only made her inner turmoil worse. The pleasant quiet of the fading afternoon was gone, replaced by a thrumming tension that hung heavy between them. The golden light now seemed to mock her, highlighting the impossibility of her situation. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't even properly understand it herself. All she knew was that the simple touch of his hand had shattered the fragile peace she had carefully constructed around her nascent emotions, leaving her exposed and vulnerable to a feeling that threatened to unravel her entire world. A line crossed. The jolt of his hand on her arm, meant to steady, had instead destabilized something far deeper within Sarah. It wasn't just the shock of unexpected contact, nor the unfamiliar warmth that lingered on her skin. It was the sudden, undeniable clarity that crashed over her, a wave of understanding so profound it stole the very air from her lungs. This feeling, this treacherous, exhilarating surge that had rocketed through her veins, was not the quiet comfort of friendship she had so carefully, so desperately, tried to label it as. It was something else entirely, something forbidden, something dangerous. The meticulous order of her inner world, once as neatly arranged as the rows in her garden, now lay scattered and upturned. The electric sensation, a term she'd heard Arthur use to describe the vibrancy of life in the outside world, now resonated within her own being, a terrifying echo of a truth she could no longer deny. She had fallen, not just stumbled, but fallen into a chasm of feeling for Mr. Arthur, an Englishman. A cold dread seeped into her bones, chilling her from the inside out. This profound realization, so stark and unyielding, brought with it a suffocating weight of guilt. It settled in her chest, a heavy, unyielding stone pressing down on her heart. How could she have allowed this? How had the quiet, almost innocent curiosity that first drew her to his isolated farmhouse ripened into such a potent, illicit emotion? The journey from shared silences to whispered confidences, from practical advice to profound understanding, had been so gradual, so insidious, she hadn't recognized the perilous path she was treading until it was too late. The vibrant colors of the late afternoon light, usually a source of calm reflection, now seemed to mock her internal turmoil. The familiar sounds of the farm, a distant cowbell, the rustle of wind through the cornfield, faded into a muted backdrop against the deafening roar of her own thoughts. She walked, almost stumbled, back towards her home, her mind a whirlwind of recrimination and fear. Each step was heavy, weighted by the knowledge that a line had been crossed, a boundary irrevocably breached. A heavy knot formed in her stomach, tightening with each breath. This secret, this monstrous, beautiful secret, could never be explained to her family. Not her mother, whose eyes held a lifetime of quiet wisdom, nor her father, whose unwavering faith guided their every action. How could she articulate the intangible pull, the silent language that had blossomed between her and Arthur, to a world that saw only stark divisions? The gulf between their worlds, once a physical distance, now felt like an unbridgeable chasm of understanding. The memory of Arthur's hand, firm and warm, on her arm, burned with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. It was a brand, marking her with a knowledge she could neither erase nor articulate. The quiet thrill of their clandestine meetings, once a source of invigorating escape, now morphed into a suffocating burden. Each stolen moment, each shared glance, each whispered word now carried the heavy consequence of her developing feelings. What had once felt like a liberating adventure, a small rebellion against the constraints of her life, now felt like a dangerous game with her very soul at stake. She imagined the questions in her mother's eyes, the quiet disappointment in her father's voice, if they were ever to discover the truth. The shame would be unbearable, a searing heat that would scorch her spirit. Her community, her entire identity, was built upon unwavering adherence to the Ordnung, to the traditions passed down through generations. And here she was, harboring a feeling for an Englishman that defied every tenet of that sacred path. As she entered the familiar warmth of her kitchen, the scent of baking bread did little to soothe her frayed nerves. The usual comfort of home felt alien, tainted by the heavy secret she carried. She moved through the evening chores with a mechanical precision, her mind racing. Every interaction, every glance, every word spoken by her family seemed imbued with a new, terrifying significance. Were they looking at her differently? Could they sense the turmoil raging within her? The paranoia was a new, unwelcome companion. The silence that had once bound her to Arthur, a silent understanding that transcended words, now felt like a prison of her own making, built brick by brick with stolen moments and unspoken feelings. She yearned for the simplicity of their initial agreement, the clear boundaries of mutual curiosity. But that innocence was shattered, irrevocably broken by the electric jolt of a simple touch, by the terrifying clarity of a feeling too strong, too forbidden, to ever be wished away. The path ahead was shrouded in a fog of uncertainty and fear, and Sarah, for the first time in her meticulously ordered life, felt utterly, terrifyingly lost. The empty oak tree. The morning's crisp air, usually a welcome jolt, felt sharp and alien as Arthur journeyed to the oak. Arriving earlier than usual, a quiet eagerness hummed beneath his ribs. He carried a small, leather-bound Emerson, planning to read a passage on nature's inherent divinity that he felt sure Sarah would appreciate. The sun, a pale disk, cast long blue shadows across the dewy grass. A gentle breeze rustled the ancient oak's leaves, a sound like whispered secrets. He settled onto mossy roots, the familiar scent of damp earth and decay filling his nostrils. The book lay open, but his gaze kept straying to the winding path Sarah always took. Usually, he'd hear the soft crunch of her boots, or catch the faint lavender note of her soap long before she appeared. Today, only crickets chirped and distant cattle lowed. Minutes bled into a quarter hour, then half an hour. The sun climbed, warming the air, but a chill began to spread through Arthur's chest. He rationalized her absence, a delayed chore, a sick animal, a family matter. Her life, he knew, danced to the farm and community's rhythms, not a clock's arbitrary tick. He closed the book, its words blurring. Another hour passed. Light dappled through the branches, a mosaic dancing on the forest floor. A squirrel chattered indignantly from a nearby branch, its beady eyes fixed on him. A knot tightened in Arthur's stomach. This was unlike her. Sarah was punctual, even early, for their meetings, valuing their shared time. He'd seen the quiet intensity in her gaze, the subtle curve of her lips as she absorbed his words. He rose, paced a small circle, then sat again. He consulted his pocket watch, though he knew the time instinctively. It was well past their usual window. A tendril of unease unfurled. Had he misspoken? Offended her? He replayed their last conversation, dissecting every word, every glance. No fault, no misstep. Their last meeting had been, by all accounts, perfect. He recalled the brief, accidental brush of her hand against his, a warmth, a connection. He waited until the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden streaks through the trees. The air cooled, carrying the scent of impending dusk. The oak, once a vibrant meeting point, now felt stark and empty. He walked home, the Emerson unread, his mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions. The farmhouse, usually a sanctuary, felt suddenly too vast, too silent. He returned the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Each morning he approached the oak with a flicker of hope, which slowly dimmed into a dull ache. He tried to rationalize, to find a logical explanation. Illness, perhaps? For a fleeting moment he considered walking to her family's farm, but instantly dismissed the idea. That would be an unforgivable breach, an invasion of privacy, a dangerous exposure of their secret. The oak, once a symbol of their growing bond, became a monument to her absence. Its broad branches, once offering comfort, now loomed indifferent and silent. He found himself staring at the path, willing her into existence, imagining her familiar silhouette emerging. But the path remained empty, an unbroken stretch of green and brown. Early autumn's vibrant colors softened into muted tones. The oak's leaves turned from green to gold, then a rich russet, before beginning their slow, mournful descent. Each falling leaf felt like a tiny goodbye. Arthur sat for hours, sometimes with his book, sometimes just watching the world, but always, always gazing at the empty path. The silence that had once been a comfort now felt like a heavy shroud. His hope, once a sturdy flame, dwindled to a tiny, flickering ember, threatening to extinguish altogether. He was left with a profound sense of loss, a hollow space where Sarah's presence used to be. The oak tree, once brimming with shared words and quiet understanding, was now just a tree, empty and alone. The confrontation. The oppressive quiet of the farmhouse had begun to feel less like peaceful solitude and more like a vast, echoing chamber of absence. A week had turned into 2, then 3, and still the worn path to the oak tree remained undisturbed, save for the occasional deer print. Arthur had tried to reason with himself, to honor the unspoken limits of their connection, but the hollow ache in his chest refused to dissipate. He found himself scanning the horizon from his study window, his gaze drawn habitually to the Stoltzfus farm, a silent prayer forming on his lips for a glimpse of her. One sweltering afternoon, a flash of blue caught his eye on the dusty road that wound past his property. It was Sarah, her bonnet a familiar beacon, walking home from what he presumed was the weekly market in town. She carried a basket, its contents hidden beneath a white cloth, and her stride was steady, though perhaps a shade slower than usual. This was it. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to break the suffocating silence. He didn't think, he simply acted. Throwing on a straw hat, he strode out of his front door, his heart thrumming against his ribs. The gravel crunched loudly beneath his boots as he hurried to intercept her before she reached the lane leading to her farm. "Sarah!" he called out, his voice rough with an unfamiliar urgency. She paused, her back to him, then slowly turned. Her face, usually so serene, was carefully composed, but he detected a faint tightening around her eyes, a shadow beneath the brim of her bonnet. The setting sun cast long shadows, making her appear almost ethereal against the vibrant green of the cornfields. He stopped a respectful distance away, the dust from his hurried approach settling around his feet. I haven't seen you," he began, the words feeling inadequate, almost childish. He swallowed, forcing himself to be direct. "You haven't come to the tree. I've waited." Sarah's gaze dropped to her worn leather shoes, the simple black fabric of her dress blending with the lengthening shadows. Her hands, usually so deft and busy, clutched the market basket with a white-knuckled grip. The air, thick with the scent of summer dust and distant hay, suddenly felt heavy, charged with unspoken truths. "I know, Mr. Penwright," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, softer than he remembered, yet strangely firm. The sound of his formal address, after weeks of their easy, unspoken familiarity, was a sharp reminder of the chasm that separated them. Arthur felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Is everything all right? Did something happen? He searched her face, desperate for any flicker of the warmth and understanding that had once passed between them. Her silence had been more unsettling than any scolding. She finally raised her head. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky before a storm, met his. There was a depth of sadness there he hadn't seen before, a profound weariness that startled him. "I cannot come any more," she stated, her voice stronger this time, though still laced with a fragile sorrow. Each word was carefully placed, as if carved from stone. "But why?" He felt a desperate urgency, a need to understand the abrupt cessation of their delicate connection. "Have I offended you? Have I said something wrong?" He racked his brain, replaying their every conversation, every shared silence, but found no offense. Sarah shook her head slowly, her bonnet swaying slightly. A lock of her dark hair, usually tucked meticulously, had escaped and lay against her cheek. "No, you have done nothing wrong, Mr. Penright." She paused, her gaze drifting over his shoulder to the rolling hills, as if seeking an answer there. It is not right. It cannot continue." His hope, which had flared so brightly at seeing her, began to dwindle, replaced by a cold dread. "Not right? What isn't right, Sarah?" He took a step closer, compelled by an instinct to bridge the distance, but she subtly shifted back, a silent barrier rising between them. She looked down again, her fingers tracing the rough weave of her basket. "Our meetings, they are not for me, not for my life." Her voice was quiet, but imbued with an undeniable finality. He saw a tremble in her lower lip, a fleeting vulnerability she quickly suppressed. "But we were simply talking," Arthur argued, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. He knew it had been more than just talk. It had been connection, understanding, a shared space of quiet intimacy. Sarah finally looked up, her gaze direct, though tinged with an almost unbearable pain. "It is more than talk, Mr. Penright, and it cannot be." Her voice was barely audible, yet carried the weight of an unmovable conviction. The afternoon sun, once a comforting warmth, now seemed to highlight the stark distance between them. He felt a profound sense of loss, a chilling premonition that this was not merely a pause, but an ending. He stood there, a lump forming in his throat, watching her turn and resume her walk towards the Stoltzfus lane, her back a quiet testament to her decision. The dust she stirred up settled slowly, just like the ashes of his hope. The heart's decision. "I cannot come any more, Mr. Arthur." The words, though uttered softly, carried an unyielding finality, slicing through the crisp autumn air. Sarah's gaze, which had been fixed on the distant fields, now pierced his directly. A profound sadness resided in their depths, a quiet sorrow mirroring the afternoon sun's fading gleam. Yet, beneath the grief, Arthur discerned a nascent resolve, a strength he hadn't witnessed before. The same quiet determination that guided her hands in the garden now turned inward. "It is not right," she continued, her voice a mere whisper, each syllable ringing with undeniable truth. Her concise, unembellished explanation left no room for discourse. It was a statement of immutable fact, a declaration of a principle governing her very existence. Arthur yearned to argue, to plead, to offer some alternative, but the sheer simplicity of her pronouncement rendered him mute. He grasped its truth, even as his heart vehemently rebelled. He truly looked at her then, seeing not merely the Amish woman he'd grown to anticipate, but a soul wrestling with immense internal strife. The gentle curve of her jaw, the barely perceptible tremor in her hands clutching the worn fabric of her apron, these were not signs of indifference, but of a deep, painful struggle. He knew, with sudden, chilling clarity, that this decision had not come easily. It had been forged in a crucible of fear and duty, hammered into place by the very foundations of her life. The ensuing silence stretched taut, suffocating. Wind rustled mournfully through the dry cornstalks in the nearby field. A lone crow's cry echoed from the skeletal branches of the oak, an omen of the emptiness settling in Arthur's chest. He longed to reach out, to reassure her, to tell her that whatever she felt, whatever she feared, was safe with him. But the unspoken rules of their fragile connection, a bond he had always striven to honor, held him captive. To press her now would be to violate the very trust they had so carefully cultivated. Sarah's gaze flickered from his face to the ground, then back to the horizon. It was a subtle shift, but Arthur understood its import. She was withdrawing, retreating into the sanctuary of her own resolve. He watched a faint blush creep onto her cheeks, a fleeting brush of color against her pale skin. It spoke of a deeper emotion, something beyond simple sadness, something he couldn't quite decipher, but which intensified the profound sense of loss engulfing him. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and strained. "Sarah," he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil within. I understand." He didn't, not fully. He grasped the abstract notion of not right, the cultural imperative dictating her life. But he didn't comprehend the depth of her pain, the exact nature of the struggle leading to this agonizing decision. He didn't know the precise boundaries she felt she had transgressed. And he certainly didn't understand the profound sense of abandonment threatening to consume him. Yet, he knew he had to speak, anything, to acknowledge the weight of her words, to validate the courage it must have taken to utter them. A flicker of surprise crossed Sarah's face, swiftly veiled by her usual composure. Perhaps she had expected an argument, a plea, a desperate attempt to salvage their connection. His acceptance, however reluctant, seemed to disarm her. "I wish you well, Mr. Arthur," she said, her voice softer, more fragile now. It was a dismissal, a blessing, and a farewell all woven into one, the last thread of their connection, gently severed. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she turned. Her back was to him, a straight, unyielding line. The modest gray of her dress seemed to absorb the last vestiges of light, making her almost a part of the fading landscape. She didn't look back. She simply walked, her footsteps barely disturbing the dust of the road, moving away from him, away from their shared moments under the oak tree, away from the silent understanding that had blossomed between them. Arthur stood frozen, watching her retreat. Each step she took deepened the ache in his chest, a hollow, gnawing pain resonating with the silence she left behind. The rustle of the corn, the cry of the crow, they all seemed to mock the emptiness. He felt the weight of her decision, a crushing burden placed on her, and now on him. He respected it, yes, because he respected her above all else. But respect did not diminish the sorrow. It merely granted it a dignified, agonizing space in his heart. The delicate intimacy, woven from shared observations and unspoken words, was truly gone. And he was left alone, under the vast, indifferent sky, with only the echoes of her final, resolute words. "It is not right." And he knew, with a cold certainty, that it was over. Lessons remembered. Arthur watched Sarah recede into the twilight, her white bonnet a diminishing bloom against the darkening trees. Each step deepened the chasm between them, a final, definitive severing of their fragile connection. The gate's click, sharp and stark, punctuated the quiet evening. Then she vanished, leaving only the ghost of wood smoke and an echoing silence. Leaning against a porch post, the rough wood biting into his palm, he slowly exhaled. It was truly over. The unspoken agreement, the clandestine lessons, the quiet moments of shared understanding, all dissolved into the fading light. "It is not right," her words reverberated in his mind, clear and unambiguous. He grasped, or at least tried to grasp, the immense gulf separating their worlds, a divide he'd perhaps naively hoped curiosity and shared humanity could bridge. He'd sought to comprehend her world, inadvertently stumbling into the deepest chambers of her heart, or so it felt now. A sharp pang of disappointment pierced him. He hadn't realized his reliance on their meetings, on her quiet wisdom, on her simple, honest presence. It wasn't merely information for his book. It was the subtle shift in his own perspective, the gentle broadening of his understanding of what truly mattered. He'd arrived seeking an academic subject, only to find something more, a wordless connection, a bond forged in shared glances and unspoken accords. He closed his eyes, picturing her face framed by the bonnet, her gaze often demure but capable of profound warmth and intelligence when it met his. He recalled the reverence in her hands as she held a freshly picked tomato, her intricate explanation of a quilt's patterns, each stitch a narrative. He remembered her gentle patience correcting his clumsy milking attempts, the soft lilt of her laughter as he fumbled with the churn. These weren't mere observations, they were indelible imprints on his soul. The farmhouse felt suddenly vast, desolate. His books, once so vital, now seemed cold, inert objects. He had pursued knowledge within their pages, but Sarah had imparted wisdom gleaned from the earth, from community, from an abiding faith, a different kind of truth, resonating with a quiet power he hadn't known existed. He stepped inside, floorboards creaking, each sound amplified in the sudden stillness. He lit a lamp, its warm glow pushing back the encroaching shadows, yet unable to dispel the chill in his heart. His hand traced the rough-hewn table where she had often sat, sharing stories and tea. The memory brought a bittersweet ache. He wouldn't pursue her. Her resolve had been absolute. To do so would be to disrespect her, to violate the very understanding they'd built. He might not fully grasp the intricacies of her struggle, the specific fear that drove her decision, but he respected the boundary she had drawn. It was a line he could not, would not, cross. But the lessons, they would endure. They had woven themselves into the fabric of his being, altering his worldview, shaping the very questions he would now ask. He had come to write a detached academic study of the Amish. Now, that book would be different. It would be infused with Sarah's spirit, her quiet dignity, the profound, simple truths she had shared. He walked to his desk, stacked with notes, half-finished manuscripts, research. He picked up his pen, its familiar weight a comfort. The words would come. They had to. This was no longer just an academic pursuit. It was a tribute, a way to honor the understanding she had so generously, if secretly, bestowed upon him. He would chronicle the resilience of their faith, the strength of their community, the quiet beauty of their traditions. He would write about lessons learned from the land, the seasons, the rhythm of a life lived in harmony with nature. But most importantly, he would write about the kind Amish woman who had opened his eyes, who had shared a glimpse of her world with an outsider, and who, in doing so, had left an indelible mark on his soul. He wouldn't name her, of course. He would protect her anonymity, just as he would protect the sanctity of their shared secret. Yet, between the lines, in the subtle nuances of his prose, her presence would be felt. Her spirit would imbue every word. This book would be his testament to Sarah, to the quiet strength and profound kindness of a woman who had, for a brief, precious time, allowed him to see beyond the veil of his own world. He dipped his pen into the inkwell, the metallic scent of familiar comfort. He began to write, the words flowing with new clarity, new purpose. The ache of loss remained, a dull throb beneath the surface, but it was now tempered by profound gratitude. Sarah was gone from his porch, but she was not gone from his heart, nor from the story he was now compelled to tell. His book would be a vessel for her memory, a silent, lasting echo of the lessons she had taught him.